Ajnanatimidandasya jnanam janashalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Shrishtam Manumapi Satriputram Atra Swarupam Rupam Tasyagrajamuro Purim Mathurim Gastavatim Radha Kundam Girivaram Maho Radhikamadhavasam Prapto Yasya Pratita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natasme Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Nikhila Shruti Male Ratnamala Diti Nirajita Padapankajanta Aji Mukta Kulairupashyamanam Paritastam Harinam Samshrayami Anarpitacharim Chirat Karunayavatirna Kalo Shamarpaitununnatajvalarasam Sabhakti Shriyam Hari Purata Sundara Dyuti Kadamba Sandipitaha Sada Hridaye Kandare Spurato Vasachinandana Ajanulambita Bhujo Kanakavadato Sankirtanai Kapitaru Kamalaya Takshu Vishwambaro Dhiyabaro Jugadharma Palam Bande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataru Hladini Shakti Swarupaya Gauranga Suridaya Cha Bhakta Shakti Pradhanaya Gadadhara Namastute He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Radhe Vrindavanadhishe Karunamritavahini Kripaya Nijapadabja Dashanmayam Pradiyatam Bhaktya Vihina Aparadalakshay Kiptashtakamaditaranga Kripamayi Tvam Sharanam Prapanam Vrinde Namaste Charanarvindam Vrinde Namaste Charanarvindam Srila Gurudev ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Shri Dauji Gopal ji ki jai, Shri Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Venu-gita ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanand Hari Hari Bol. So, welcome to all of you. Pranam. Thank you so much for your presence and association. So we will continue with our series of lectures on Sri Venu-gita, or the Song of the Flute. Today we are meeting number 4. We will be studying, let's see, that's the idea, verses 3 and 4. Let's see if I can make the two of them. There are two verses interconnected with one another, so that's why in this occasion we have been bold enough to try to see two in one class. But as usual, first of all, let's make some brief recap of what we saw yesterday. Verse number 2 of Sri Venu-gita, which is very similar to verse number 1, as we mentioned, but with some added features, like some gradual unfolding of the very same scene. The first two verses of the chapter depict the situation in the forest, with Krishna entering the forest with his friends, with the cows, with the gopas, and with all the different ingredients of the forest, giving him the welcome after such a long night of separation. So the two of them are relatively similar, but the first one depicts a particular scene, Mantrabhaya Upasana, and the second one enhances, if you will, the description of that same scene, Krishna entering the autumn forest with the lotus ponds and the fragrance and the trees and the birds and the cows and so on. So we mentioned yesterday in some detail, it's never enough, but how Brinda Devi, this nymph, divine magic nymph of Braj, orchestrates on a daily basis every single detail and element of any particular scene of the whole lila to function in its best possible way. The bumblebees to buzz in a particular tone, to give the drum, the tambura, in a particular tone, and the bees and the birds to chirp and sing in a particular way, and the peacocks to dance in this way, and certain trees to to blossom in a particular way, certain specific flowers, and to invoke certain particular seasons favorable to the occasion, and so on. So we spent some detail speaking about the importance of all these elements, like for example, the trees of Vrindavan, or the trees in itself. We can speak of the importance of the trees, what to speak of the trees of Vrindavan, Braja Briksha Mahima, the glories of the Brajavasi trees. We spent some time yesterday about that, but it's never enough again. And in this way, we also spoke how the bumblebees and the peacocks and the birds and everything represent some form or other of udipana, or constant kindlers to the specific bhavas that every member of Vrindavan is having in connection to Krishna. And especially we concentrated on the bumblebees, since the name that Krishna received in this second verse is Madhupati, which means, as we mentioned, Lord of liquor, or master of honey, or the protector of the madhus, or the madhavas, or the yadus, or the yadavas, all of these converging in his protection to the Brajavasis. And of course, the way Krishna protects the Brajavasis ultimately is in terms of Prem, basically. That's the ultimate shelter, if you will, the shelter of Krishna himself, basically. He himself feels sheltered when he falls at the feet of Sri Radha, the very personification of Prem, and so on. So basically, we describe how this Madhupati, accompanied by such a retinue and entering in such a stage, Tukuja Venum. He vibrated his venum, his flute. So we mentioned this word Tukuja, according to the tense in which it appears in Sanskrit, indicates a similar sound to the sound of the cuckoo also, which of course in a very esoteric way, the song of the cuckoo, the cry of the cuckoo is compared to the cries of that happens in the loving battle, if you will, also. But on some other level, it means that the flute in itself could be conceived as having a life of its own and presenting a song of its own. So Venu-gita, we ended the talk sharing some of these ideas. That was yesterday, I no longer remember. Different levels of possibilities of the meaning of Venu-gita. So one of them being, the song of the flute. The flute is singing in itself. It has a life of its own. Krishna just taking it in his hands, in his mouth, and the flute just sings by itself. Or Krishna singing through the flute as an instrument, or Krishna singing to the different species of the forest as he's entering the Brajavan, since all the species of the forest, as we mentioned, were in separation from him after such a long night. So they are welcoming him, blossoming flower, and then Krishna is singing and reciprocating to each one of them. Yatamam prapadanti tam stadaiva bhajami. Or also we mentioned he's playing the flute to calm down the Vatsalya camp, headed by Jashoda, who is totally like in anxiety that Krishna is going to the forest and what will be maybe happening, and is he okay? So Krishna keeps playing the flute by the instruction of Yashoda. You keep playing the flute so I can hear you at the distance and know that you are okay, and I'll know where you are according to the distance and the tone, and I can locate you in the midst of the forest. And we mentioned how the whole forest or helps for that to happen, like silences themselves to the sound of the flute gets to Yashoda's ears, and she can survive one more day, basically, in separation. Also, of course, we mentioned that Venu-gita can be interpreted on some level as Krishna reciprocating with his friends who are accompanying him of the forest, or Krishna reciprocating with the cows who are having this bell, at least the leader of each group, and they're moving here and there, and Krishna can know where they are by the bell. So Krishna is saying, okay, my bell is my flute, so whenever I play my flute, you know where I am. In case you get lost in exploring new grasses, here I am. No? And he's calling them by their name through the sound of the flute and so on. But ultimately, and as the Sukadev presents in the Bhagavatam, this Venu-gita is directed for the gopis. We are in the Madhurya Rasa section of the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. So that's pretty much focused on Madhurya Rasa, and this is building up to the Rasa Panchadhyaya. We are still like 8 chapters to go for the first chapter of Rasa Panchadhyaya here, but it's gradually building in that direction. So Venu-gita could be understood that Krishna is singing for the gopis, but on top of that, we can understand Venu-gita is the gopis singing in reply to Krishna singing to them. So Krishna maybe thought of playing the flute in the forest, sending messages to the gopis, nourishing their purvarag for each other, and anticipating the meeting. But eventually, as we will see, the main, ultimate Venu-gita of this chapter is from verse 7 onwards, when the gopis start to sing in reply to Krishna's Venu-gita. You follow the idea? Okay, so that's our recap from yesterday. And we mentioned also how Krishna is, although Krishna's friends play flute with him generally, in this precise moment, due to some words that appear in these verses of today also, it is mentioned how Krishna was the only one playing the flute here, like implying he was playing the flute for the gopis in this particular occasion. It has some purpose, some aim, and there will be a particular reciprocation. So today we will be studying verses number 3 and 4, which again has some conceptual flow, interconnected. And now we will turn from the forest and Krishna and his friends and the cows and Balaram and all the species there to the village where the gopis are experiencing the byproducts of that Venu-gita coming to them before their Venu-gita. And we will see how it is described, how they hear that sound and they attempt to describe their experience of that sound. Out of ecstasy, they are drawn to express that, but out of, if you will, a greater ecstasy, they cannot say anything. Like Jiva Goswami mentions in Gopal Shampoo, there's a certain level of spiritual experience which ends up in silence, but that silence is speaking more than 1,000 words, basically. So let's go to those verses in case you want to follow. You have them, I think the file has been shared. It says like this. It says, Tad braja striya shrutya Venu-gitam shmarodayam Kaschit paroksham krishnasya Swasakibhyo navarnayam Tad varnayaitum aradbha Smarantya krishna chestitam Nashakam shmarabhigena Vikshipta manaso nripa. So I'll read the translation and then we will try to explain a little bit about this. So the first verse, verse number 3 says, when the young ladies in the cowherd village of Braj heard the song of Krishna's flute, we are back in the village now, which arouses the influence of Cupid, some of them privately began describing Krishna's qualities to their intimate friends. The cowherd girls began to speak about Krishna, but when they remembered his activities, O king, the power of Cupid disturbed their minds, and thus they could not speak. So they somehow said something, start speaking, but it didn't last for long. No? Immediately, the speech became like captured by a higher way of communication in the form of non-speak, language beyond language. So that's this verse. Let's go a little bit word by word, because and it's an important point also that we are trying to unpack in this series. You know, sometimes if one may ask why you go word by word, why it's not enough just general meaning, no? Why our acharyas generally go word by word and not only translating the words but trying to unpack every word. No? It may sound a little bit like extreme, no? Like every word you are trying to make too much out of every word, but actually that's the nature of the Bhagavatam. Every single word has unlimited content, unlimited potential. Mahaprabhu says that in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna Tulya Bhagavata Vibhu Sarvasraya, yeah, Prati Shloke Prati Akshare Nana Artakaya, which means Srimad Bhagavatam, here we are with the Bhagavatam, taking darshan, so is as great as Krishna himself, basically. Krishna Tulya Bhagavata. Tulya means like equal. So between Bhagavat and Bhagavan, there's no difference. Srimad Bhagavatam is not different from Sri Hari. And therefore, Bhagavan is the shelter of everything. Bhagavan is unlimited. So similarly, every single verse, it says Prati Shloke, Prati Akshare. So every verse and every syllable of the Bhagavatam, Nana Artakaya, it has unlimited levels of meanings and layers of purport. So that's important, that we take the time of getting lost and found in these divine texts. That's the potential of the Bhagavatam. Every single verse, not only the verse, every syllable in the Bhagavatam has unlimited layers of content. So it's up to us to open ourselves to that revelation and being led by our acharyas to discover, explore this fathomless ocean. So, so word by word, let's go for a minute. So tat brajas tirashrutya Venu-gitam smarodayam. So that means that. Interestingly, the two verses start with the same word, tat. We will explain why. So that refers to that song, that Venu-gita, and then we'll explain what's the meaning of that Venu-gita. So Brajastriya refers to the gopis of Vrindavan. Of course, when translating the verse into English, we cannot follow exactly the same order of words that they appear in Sanskrit. Sanskrit allows for certain flexibility where some words can be in different order to match also like rhyme and so on. But you get the idea of the verse. After that, for us will come Venu-gitam in our English psychology. So that Venu-gitam, Brajastriya Ashrutya. Ashrutya means they heard, hearing. So the Brajastriya, or the ladies of Braj, they heard that Venu-gitam. Smarodayam. So what's the nature of Venu-gita? Smara, Udayam. Smara means Cupid, and Uday means what? Tasida Krishna Prem. Sadhya Kaunai, Shravanai Sudachit, Karai, Uday. Arunadai Kirtan. Uday means like giving rise to. So this song, the effect that it had on the gopi was it gave rise to waves of cupidity. Yeah. So they became cupified, basically. So that's the first part of the first verse. Then it says, Kachit paroksham krishnasya sasakhibhyo nana navarnayam. So Kachit, some of those gopis, so now we'll see it's getting more and more specific. The gopis, now some of those gopis, paroksham. Paroksham means indirect speech or secretly, confidentially. Krishnasya, means about Krishna. Then Anvavarnayam, the last word, then we go to the penultimate word. Anavarnayan means describe. So in some of those gopis got together in groups and privately described, which was privately with whom? Swasakibhyo, with their intimate sakis, with their intimate companions. They started to reveal their minds in confidence about what were their feeling regarding that awakening of Cupid in connection to the flute. That's the first verse. I mean, the third verse, the first here. And the second starts again, Tat. Trat Barnaitum Arat Baha. So Arat Baha means in the beginning. So in the beginning of that attempt of saying something, Barnaitum means to describe. So in the beginning of that attempt of description, Smarantya Krishna Chestitam. Smarantya means Smaranam, by remembering. Krishna Chestitam means activities of Krishna. They start to speak about Krishna and they start to remember the activities of Krishna. For the gopis, this is like, it's impossible to separate one thing of the other. It's not that they're saying something about Krishna and they are not connecting qualities of Krishna with Leela of Krishna, names of Krishna, with love of Krishna, and all Nam, Guna, Rupa, Leela for the gopis is like they are thrown into one wave after another. And that's showing us how it should happen to us as well. We are singing the names of Krishna, and that invokes the form, and that invokes the qualities, and that invokes the Leela. And then Kirtan is over because it will happen the same of the gopis, silence, choked up. Krishna Chestitam. So they start to remember Krishna's activities. And Nashakam Shmara Vigena Bikshiptam Anashon Ripa. So the gopis say, then Na Ashrakam means they were incapable. Shmara, again, Shmara, which means Cupid. Shmara Vigena, by the force of Cupid, in other words, by the intensity of their romantic attraction toward Krishna, they were incapable. Bikshipta Manasan, they were incapable of continuing doing what they were trying to start doing. Say something about Krishna. That's the Harikatha of the gopis. It lasts for 2 seconds and that's over. No? Like Guru Maharaj sometimes says, he say, well, we hear that some devotees chant so many rounds, but we never hear that, for example, Rupa Goswami chanted 3 lakhs or something, not because he was lazy, but because he started chanting and after half a syllable, he passed out. So those were if you meet Rupa Goswami, please do not ask him, how many rounds have you chanted today? He has already passed. Help him to come back, basically. So similar to gopis, no? Gopis are giving Harikatha. How much did it last to do? 2-3 seconds. They choke up, no more Harikatha. But that silence is the essence of Harikatha. That's the point. So Bikshipta Manason Ripa. Bikshipta means agitated, Manaso means mind. So their minds were agitated by love, not by lust. And Nripa will explain what's the meaning. Nripa means, O king. So Sukadeva is speaking to Parikshit. Remember the context of the meta-narrative in the narrative. So let's try to unpack something in this connection about this very poetic narration of the Bhagavatam. As you very, very well may already know, that the Bhagavatam, as Srila Jiva Goswami mentions, he speaks about to us in 3 main languages. He speaks to us as a king, as a friend, and as a lover. In other words, he speaks in Upanishadic language, he speaks in Puranic language, and he speaks in the language of Kavya or poetry. So now we are fully into the Kavya section of the Bhagavatam, if you will. Although we may say there is some story here, it's still a Purana, there is some order or instruction in the sense that the gopis hear the flute and for them it's just like, their heart is given the instruction, run after that. But that's not the type of Upanishadic dictum we are referring. But it has to do mostly with poetry. So poetry is like a language beyond language. When ordinary language have reached its fulfilled its ultimate purpose, there we are ready for poetry, which is a as our Guru Maharaj will say, participatory language, which clearly further depicts the ultimate nature of reality, which is participatory. It's inviting us to a type of dialogue, a type of conversation, a type of interaction. And of course, here we are in the apex of that conversation, which is loving interaction between our source and the souls. All of this ultimately depicted in Sri Krishna and the Brajavas and the Brajagopis here. So I'm making this point because, and of course, this is the zenith of the Bhagavatam. Before this, Sukadev Goswami has spoken like maybe more than 10, almost, more than 5, 6, 7,000 verses, trying to give context and create the momentum to reach such a poetry, and giving lots of other levels of instructions, as Krishna himself does in the Gita. Before he's saying Sarvadharman Parityaja, he says like almost 95% of the Bhagavad Gita is all that comes before Sarvadharman Parityaja. So similarly, when we find here the example of the gopis, it's important to understand that so many other things need to be in place for us to really appreciate what's going on here. But somehow we are trying to say something, but please remember there's big context to give support to this Venu-gita. So do not forget that and just try to skip that and enter the song of the flute, because that won't happen. The flute won't sound. So again, so the first 2 verses, the focus was in the forest, Krishna there, Krishna presenting his Venu-gita in the forest. And now we are back into the village. Remember, we are in the Purban Lila, mid-morning pastimes, where Krishna is in the forest with his friends and animals and everyone in the forest, while mostly the Vatsalya and Madhurya department is burning in separation in the village. So Krishna is sending Venu-gita from the forest, and here we will see the beginnings of the Venu-gita in the village, and the gopis singing in reply. So we have a change of stage. So try to travel in your mind to all those different spots as much as you can. It's important to discipline our imagination. That's not mental speculation. That's something different. Disciplined imagination is something necessary for entering eventually into the Lila, and for developing a feeling for what we are hearing, because the Lila narrative is not just something to witness in a passive way. Like, okay, yes, Krishna's doing that with the goal. Oh, nice story. And of course, in the beginning, one may have those filters, but as we progress in our hearing, a Lila narrative is not to be heard from the vantage point of a witness, from the vantage point of a participant. Like the very theory of drama in Indian aesthetics. If you are a real Sahridaya or someone with the heart for appreciating certain particular type of arts, like music, you are hearing Indian classical music, and if the musician knows how to unfold all that the raga implies, all the rasa implied in a particular musical presentation, and the audience is capable of appreciating that, at one point the audience is not audience anymore. I mean, the audience won't feel like I'm witnessing a concert of classical music of India. The audience will be thrown into a pool of a certain experience that will be the same experience that the musician is experiencing while presenting that. The same in one way. So it's no longer this like I'm witnessing this performance, but participatory again. Poetry, music, all the arts, all this doctrine of rasa, bhakti rasa is participatory. So our hearing should evolve in that direction. And we are here in sadhana bhakti, exercising, practicing this type of exposing ourselves to sacred narratives and try to connect with that emotionally, as our Guru Maharaj will say. Krishna Lila in particular, Braja Lila in particular, lends itself for that type of emotional bonds, that we can really feel ourselves one of them. Of course, in a proper way, not like by cheap imitation, but again, by disciplined imagination. There's a place for that. So again, this verse starts to speak to us about another Venu-gita. from the Venu-gita that Krishna is playing in the forest to the Venu-gita that is generated in the village. The Brahyastriya, the song sung by the Brahyastriya. So the first word, let's go to the first word of each of the two verses, tat, which means in this case, that. Srila Sanatana Goswami, he's given the meaning to that in his Brihad Vaishnava Toshani. So he's saying tat refers to that Venu-gita, which is, because again, Venu-gita, there are many Venu-gita. Every time Krishna plays the flute, that's Venu-gita in one general sense. But now we are pointing a particular type of Venu-gita. Bhaktivinoda Thakur calls that Adbhut Venu-gita. Adbhut means like wondrous, you say in English? Wondrous, like astonishing, Venu-gita. So as we mentioned last class, there are many levels of reasons why Krishna is playing the flute, in which direction, with which purpose. But the ultimate converging meaning of why he's playing the flute, that for whom, Sri Radha and so on, that's applicable only to that section in particular. Because Krishna is playing the flute, and as we mentioned, every member in Vrindavan will think, that's for me. Oh, that's for me. And everyone is right in one sense. But as we all see, here Sukadev is presenting this narrative in the Madhurya Rasa section. So again, everyone is thinking, that's for me, that's for me. But as we will see, only in the gopis will happen what is this verse is depicting. This verse, what are they saying? The waves of Cupid are being aroused. And this is not happening to Yashoda. This is not happening to the cows. This is not happening to those in Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya. This is happening to a particular department. So there's specificity in this Venu-gita, and that's why Tat is there, indicating that Venu-gita, which points to a particular circle, and which, in the case of Krishna's, and which come from a particular circle, in the case of the gopis, reciprocating with that. So, as we know, for further emphasis, the two verses start with the same word. Many times this resource is used in Sanskrit poetry, same word. And also the word Krishna appears in the two verses as well. There will be three words that appear in the two verses: Tat, Krishna, and Smara. So Krishna means Krishna, which means the supreme attractive. And as we know, he's supremely attractive because he is supremely attracted to his devotees and ultimately to Sri Radha. And Smara means, again, Cupid. So each word qualifies the other one. Cupid has to do with the influence of Madhurya Rasa, which makes Krishna Krishna. And that Krishna is that one who sings that Venu-gita. So that Krishna and Smaran, all of them further qualify each other. That song, which is sung by that Krishna, which is influenced by that Cupid, not any Cupid, but the higher Cupid, if you will. So Smara is a very interesting word, because of course Smara also is connected to the idea of Smaranam, which means remembrance. So Smara, generally translated as Cupid, or refers ultimately to a deep attachment that invokes what happens when you are deeply attached to something. Smaranam. Smara takes to Smaranam. If you are deeply attached to something, you are thinking about that all day long. You see the object of your attachment everywhere, basically. Your constant remembrance is coming out of the deep attachment. So the gopis' passion for Krishna coming from Smara, coming from Cupid, and we will speak about this Cupid. It's not ordinary Cupid. It's not the one depicted in this world, just creating influences in the context of the gunas. So one name of Cupid is Smara, again. So he's the one creating aprakrita Smara, aprakrita Cupid, if you will. The supramundane sensuality. That word is in English, sensuality. Okay. And interestingly, the Smara, when it refers to Cupid, of course, it's only used for Madhurya Rasa. Again, you won't say Smara in connection to Yashoda's attraction to Krishna or to his friends. Smara refers to romantic, it's only exclusively limited to the department of romantic love. So again, brief words of clarification. Every time we speak about the gopis having been affected by Cupid, or many times in the Shastra, their love will be described as kam, with many times it's translated as lust. So you may say, oh my God, we are in problem here. As Guru Maharaj will say, when the British came to India and they were thinking all these Hindus are crazy, they think they are God, Advaita Vedanta, or they are worshiping different gods, polytheism. I mean, I don't know which of the options is more weird than the other. But finally, they found the Vaishnavas and they found, oh, this quite relates to Christianity, devotional path of love for one God, monotheistic, many parallels with Jesus' teachings. Today is Christmas, so quite appropriate to give that example. But Christmas was over very soon for the they're in India, because they got to the Bhagavatam and to Krishna and the gopis and calm. This apparent display of extreme playboyhood, basically. Like the same Krishna that was speaking in the Gita and that seemed a very sober teacher giving universal wisdom, suddenly then is depicted as a womanizer dancing with thousands of millions and marrying 16,108 ladies and having extramarital affairs with many more than that. And for the British was like, Victorian sensibilities won them over at that point. It was too much. But again, what's the meaning of this kam? Kam means desire, actually. And Chaitanya Charitamrita says this, Sahaja Gopira Prem Nahe Prakrit Kam Kama Krida Samyatara Kare Kamanam. Kahi Kamanam. So Sahaja Gopira Prem Nahe Prakrit Kam. The love of the gopis for Krishna is sahaja, it's inborn, it's inherent, it's intrinsic. They are naturally attracted to Krishna. They do not need something to happen to be attracted. They cannot but be attracted. Many examples are there where they try not to be that attracted, and the only result is their attraction is increasing more and more. Like, they say, let's stop thinking about Krishna for a nanosecond. He's giving us considerable headaches here and there. So let's stop for a minute, for a nanosecond, not even a minute. Okay, so all of them sit like when we sit in japa trying to think about Krishna and we fail, they sit and try to forget Krishna for a nanosecond. Imagine if I tell you, let's try to remember Krishna for a nanosecond. Hopefully you can, but we may fail, who knows? But the gopis try to do the opposite. Let's try to forget him for a nanosecond, and they fail. So that's the ultimate goal to attain. They are trying to forget Krishna, and they, after a nanosecond, they start to look at each other. So, were you able to forget him? Were you able? No. Sahaja Gopira Prem. Their love is sahaja, it's inborn. They cannot, but they don't have a second option. Basically, there's not a second alternative to loving Krishna. That's the point in that sense. That's free will. Free will means you have two options basically. But when you have chosen in the right direction, there are no longer two options. There's only one option. And inside that option, of course, so many ways you can express your will. Now there is free will. You are free to express your will inside that option, which is perfect and eternal and unlimited. So the gopis many of them need to see this, which means eternally, without the beginning, they have chosen in the right direction and we will continue doing so. But the way they express their love and surrender to Krishna in the context of romantic love is such that it resembles mundane sensuality. But it's only a resemblance, and that's why it receives the name of Kam. The love of the gopis is called Kama Rupa Bhakti, one of the two divisions of Ragatmika Bhakti, of the type of prem that we find in the inhabitants of Braj, who are made of prem. You have Sambandha Rupa or Sambandhatmika, and Kama Rupa or Kamatmika. So the difference is made, as Guru Maharaj will say, because the other relationships are relatively legal. Madhumangal loves Krishna, his friends, it's okay, they are friends. Jashoda loves Krishna as his child, it's okay. She's his mother, she should. But the gopis love Krishna while they have husbands. So they shouldn't be doing that, but they are doing that nonetheless. So this divine illusion of parakia or extramarital love creates all these like extra ingredients in the of risk or giving everything without a thought, and actually it's just showcasing the nature of their surrender. So the gopis are influenced by Cupid. Again, it doesn't mean that their minds are agitated out of mundane desire, out of selfishness. There's not a whiff, you say in English, of selfishness in them. They're totally free from separate desire. We have to understand this deeply. What does it mean to not have any separate desire? That's not so easy. To be totally surrendered to Bhagavan, to not have a separate and independent sense of existence from our source. That's not so easy. We have to go through that in our relationship with Sri Guru and the sadhus. We have to learn how to surrender. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Generally, most of us are willing to die, but not to give our ego, basically, to give up our ego. That's what Arjuna says in the Gita to Krishna. I prefer to be killed in this battlefield from tip to toe with 1,000 arrows than to go through the death that you are suggesting to me, which is the ego death. No, thank you. I will receive all the arrows. I will go through all the physical pain, but ego death, oh, that's hard pill to swallow. No, so you see people in this world, for example, is willing to give their lives in, I don't know, a soldier in battle, to give their lives for their ideal, but their ideal is what? Keeping their ego alive, because they are battling in the field because the country, a sense of identity that is egoic, this needs to be diluted, but they are not willing to dilute that sense. Instead, they are willing to give their lives to die, but not to die to the, you follow my point? So people is willing even to give their lives in order not to go through the ego death. So, and all this is just like the basic foundation to understand what the gopis are about. Their love is way above that, but just to understand all these ingredients are present in their equation. They're not just uncivilized girls that are like agitated in the mundane way by a boy there in the forest, but they're the wisest of the sages and the more selfless personalities. So we have always to bear this in mind. Sukadev Goswami over and over again brings that into the picture for us not to misconstrue what's going on here. And again, as I mentioned before, Sukadev Goswami, before reaching here, he's depicting Canto 1 to 9 of the Bhagavatam, preparing the ground, preparing our minds. So we really appreciate when Krishna is playing the flute, we do not misunderstand that flute call and the response to that flute call from each one of the Brajavasis. It's totally supramundane. So remember, we are in this, let's share some thoughts about the Purva Rag. We already spoke about that, but in this Purva Rag, remember how on a daily basis, the gopis still have not joined Krishna, but on a daily basis, they are hearing this song at the distance. And Krishna is sending messages every single day through the Venu-gita or the sound of the flute to them. The Bhagavatam is saying, Gopinam Paramanandamasit Govinda Darshane Kshanam Yugasatami Vajasamjina Vinabhavat. Every time that the gopis are able to see Krishna, they feel such a great joy. Gopinam Paramanandam Asit Govinda Darshane. They have the darshan of Govinda, but one day he goes to the forest, they are thrown into again an ocean of distress till they are able to see him again. As we always say, what does it mean to see Krishna? And what does it mean to stop seeing Krishna after having seen Krishna? We don't have an idea of that. First, we have to see Krishna in every single sense. You have full darshan, and then stopping having that darshan, be ready for madness, basically. So you can have that darshan again. So in this state of Purva Rag, in this state of separation, anticipating the first official meeting, there are different sanchari bhavs, or different like ecstatic temporary expressions that invade come to the gopis, like ardent desire, lalasa, like intense longing for meeting Krishna, or udveg, which means anxiety regarding when will that happen, basically, or jagarana. Jagarana means, how is it in English? Sleeplessness, not being able to sleep. Sleeplessness. Thank you so much. So all the things are coming to the gopis. Again, this is an ecstatic thing. Do not think, oh, I don't want to go there. I want to have a nice nap. And these gopis are not basically sleeping and so on. And in the night, Rasa Leela, so no sleep at all. But that's not the place to sleep. That's the place to be awakened. There are too many things to be awakened to. So again, as we see, to pacify the turmoil in their hearts, we'll see the gopis by hearing this flute and all the things. All this flute sound is like further steering the dial, as if you will see, like churning the hearts more and more. So trying to pacify all that is going on in their hearts, they're trying to get together and Guhyama Kyati Prichati, as Srila Rupa Goswami will say, reveal their minds in confidentiality with people that will understand their inner world in a secluded place. As these verses describe, Sri Radha and other gopis start to describe among themselves the powerful effects of the flute. Sadhu Sangha, Harikatha, Shravan, Kirtan, the same thing we are doing, they are doing on some level at least. But as we say the other day, we do not project to do in the spiritual world something different from what we are doing here. That's the supremacy of bhakti. Bhakti is so generous, Golokar Prema Dan Harinam Sankirtan, that the whole world of Golok coming here and allowing us to engage in those same things that constitute the medium, the means, and constitute the goal. So here we have Shravan Kirtan, Sadhu Sangha, there we have Shravan Kirtan, Sadhu Sangha, and the concept of Prem, of course. That is, Bhakti is so generous that now we are receiving the opportunity to do those things that we will be doing for eternity. So I hope you are developing a taste for that, because those are the things that you will be doing for eternity. But again, when you are doing them with Prem, so much is in there. When we hear Bhaktivinoda Thakur's eternal services to do camphor lamps for eternity, we have to understand what does it mean. Of course, he's not only doing that at his main seva, but also so much content is in one single camphor lamp in Golok. Maybe if someone tells us to do camphor lamp for 2 hours, we start to become udveg, anxiety. This is not in Sanchari Bhav in this case. So it's important to understand the things. And okay, of course, again, as we mentioned, this Venu-gita, or this sound of the flute, did not confine its sweetness, if you will, to certain regions of the forest, but started to dance through the breeze of Vrindavan and start to enter and penetrate every single place in the Braj, in the village, every house, every ear, and every heart. But here it is described specifically in the gopis, it impacted in a particular way, giving rise to Shmara or Cupid. So this is a moment in, remember, we are here, Bhagavatam is describing the Bhoma Lila, or the Braja Lila that happens on earth, which has a chronological unfolding. Krishna is born, he's growing, going through the ages, not as it happens in Golok Vrindavan. So here in this point of the Venu-gita, Krishna is going. There's a juncture, you say, transition period between Poganda and Kishore. So Krishna's like boyhood and teenage years, if you will. So early adolescence is like blossoming in the life of Krishna from the previous age. And of course, as we know, each one of these ages had a main corresponding association, if you will, environment. And Krishna is Kumar, a child, Vatsalya Rasa prevails. When he's Poganda, a boy, Sakya Rasa prevails. And when he's Kishore, as our Guru Maharaj nicely always depicts, in the beginning, your parents are your orbit. When you are a baby, you don't have even friends. It's just mom and dad, mostly mom, then dad, No? First one, then two, but then friends start to appear. And you forgot about your parents. No? You want to spend all day long playing with your friends, and your parents come home, it's dinner is ready. I can play for eternity here. But then when you enter adolescence, you forgot about all your friends. You fell in love and you're just like, and your friends say, what's going on? Come. You're playing football and you're like, what's going on? Where is your mind? So somehow Nara Lila is again sharing some of those similar ingredients so we can bond emotionally with it. So here Krishna is about like, interestingly, like 7 years, and Sri Radha is having like 6 years, and the gopis generally have 1 year less. But it is said that according to our standards, of course, a boy that has 7 years and a girl has 6 years, I mean, it has nothing to do with romanticism here. But in the context of how these ages play out in the case of Radha and Krishna, that's a different thing. So they start to show some young teenage sensibilities. Even externally, they seem too young for that. So already they are eager to meet with each other, being so young. So what else? So the gopis here are hearing the sound of the flute. The word used here is what? Ashrutya. Ashrutya, which means Shrutya comes from Shruti. Shruti means to hear. And Shruti means hearing. And Ashrutya means hearing completely, says Sanatana Goswami. So the gopis heard the song of the flute coming from the forest completely. So completely, of course, implies completely. Deep level of absorption. They capture all the implications of that message. As you have the word Ananda, which actually comes from the word Nanda, which means joy. Nanda means joy. That's why you have Nanda, Upananda, Sunanda, and so on. And Ananda means hyper, super, mega joy, something like this. No? So in this way, Nanda and Ananda, you have Shrutya and Ashrutya. No? So how attentively the gopis heard the Venu-gita, basically, how absorbed they were in capturing or being captured, as we like, the sound of the flute. And then, again, they discuss their effect. First, Shravan, then Kirtan. But their Shravan was Ashrutya. They heard completely. And then they engage in complete Kirtan, Sam Kirtan. You want to engage in Sam Kirtan, which means full Kirtan, first you have to do full hearing, Ashrutya. No? Somehow. So they heard Harikatha, the sound of the flute may be compared to that, certain messages, but they heard completely, and then they were able to present that completely. Or, interestingly, and that's the grace of Sanskrit, the word Ashrutya, the word A, the letter A before Shrutya, can also mean the opposite. No, instead of meaning they hear completely, can mean they hear very little. Because they just heard a little bit of that flute song and they were already passionately discussing that. I mean, they were not able to, let's hear the total song and only then we will speak about, there was no place for that. So they hear a little bit of that they were able to be totally, as we mentioned today, Rupa Goswami started chanting and he lost and found there. But he chanted completely. In one sense it's complete, in one sense it's ultra incomplete, but totally complete. So similarly, the gopis here, they were not able to hear the whole thing. That's another version because of the impatience of their love. They just heard the flute and they were captured by that. So both meanings are applicable. Both meanings point into the same direction, basically. So in these verses, again, Srila Sukadeva Goswami is giving a more and more specific depiction of who are the ones afflicted in this way. First, he begins saying Brajastriya. So Brajastriya means the ladies of Braj, which of course is a generic term and can apply to every lady of Vrindavan. But in that group, Jashoda may be there because Jashoda is also Brajastriya. Jashoda is a gopi. So Of course, as we saw, it doesn't apply to her, but till this level, it seems it affected everyone. Because of course, the song of the flute affected everyone. It's not that just the gopis were affected and all the Brajavasis like, oh yeah, the flute is sounding, but that's for the gopis. No, everyone was totally like mesmerized, but in their according to their particular bhava. In verse 6, we will see it says Sarva Bhuta Manoharam. The verse says Sarva Bhuta Manoharam means the sound of the flute stole the minds of every living entity in Vrindavan. Sarva Bhuta. So it's clear that the song of the flute is affecting everyone that is there in the village, everyone in the forest where Krishna is, and everyone in the village who received that sound. But as we will see, in connection to this verse, Brayastriya, the gopis, are referring specifically to Radha because and her close Madhurya Mai gopis, because Smaran, it gave rise to Cupid. Again, this is not happening to Yashoda and other gopis. And then Sukadev Goswami further qualifies it by saying Kaschid, as we mentioned. Kaschid means some of them. So first he says Brayastriya, the gopis of Vrindavan, but some of them. Again, not Jasoda, and not even every single gopi in the Madhurya camp. Jiva Goswami says in his commentary, this Kaschid, some of them refers to Sri Radha and her camp. They are the ones who will be invoking this Venu-gita in this chapter. They are the ones who spoke about Krishna, the all-attractive, again. So in this verse, the name Krishna, as we mentioned, is mentioned twice, and as it happens along the Bhagavad and along the Bhagavad Gita as well, so many different names of Krishna are invoked in the different verses, and there are always some reason why that name and not other is invoked. So that's important that we always keep in mind. If some verse, the verse saying Keshav, Madhusudan, Madhupati, Achyuta, Krishna. We have been seeing first verse, remember, Achyuta. Second verse, Madhupati. Now Krishna. It's not just like, oh, let's pick the name you want. He has so many names. Put the one that fits better into the poetry. No, there's so many other reasons why that particular name is invoked, because every name is speaking about the quality of Krishna that is very much related to that particular verse and moment. So, so it says Katschit, some of them, and Sanatan Goswami further confirms in his commentary, the verse is Swasakibhyo. So Sri Radha spoke with Swasakibhyo, means her own Sakis, her own group of intimate friends, her own companions like Lalit and others, Jiva Goswami clarifies. So we see how the description becomes more specific, from the ladies of Braj to Radha speaking with her own Sakis. I mean, it's quite from generic, abstract idea of gopis of Braj, Madhurya, Mai gopis, Radhan, her group, and very intimate conversation in that context. And again, that was expressed in Paroksha. The word Paroksha comes here, which is an important word. I will try to be brief. Give me some minutes with your permission, because Paroksha is a very important term. Paroksha means basically Aksha. Aksha means like the eyes. And Paraksha means beyond one's eyes, beyond the evident thing that you are seeing, like beyond the clear object, like overt meaning of something. Paraksha, which goes beyond the normal interpretation of things. So Parokshabad means a language that it's giving some implied meaning. It's something, indirect speech sometimes is translated as such. And Krishna in the Bhagavatam, he's saying, one famous verse, he says, Paroksham mama chapriyam. Parokshabada risaya, and so on. Paroksham mama chapriyam. He said, I like very much this Parokshabad. He said, Paroksham mama chapriyam. It's very dear to me when things are not being said in an obvious way. And again, this has to do with kavya. It has to do with the language of poetry and the romantic indirect language that pervades the whole Madhurya Rasa. If you study, I don't know, works like Rupa Goswami's Lalita Madhava, Vidagdha, there is so much Parokshabad there. So much indirect, it's so indirect that sometimes it's difficult to follow, because it's so indirect that you have to really be totally in love to enter that and really, because it seems that they are speaking about something totally different. So you have to really pay attention and follow the narrative, the indirect narrative, and which is the particular taste that is given rise to. And this especially applies to Parakya Bhav, which is a hidden love, forbidden love, clandestine love. So it cannot be presented like, hey, Krishna, I love you. No, she rather won't go in the midst of the village and embrace Krishna. How are you doing, my beloved? And everything is crooked. So they develop this samskar for indirectness. So remember, Bhagavatam, one of the voices of the Bhagavatam is speaking as a lover. So here we have, and Krishna says, that's my favorite language. So many meanings, so many implications, so much rasa is in indirect approach. So the gopis, again, we're hearing this Venu-gita in the distance, Radha, her group, in intimate association, and started to describe their experience of that sound indirectly, even in terms of, even though they were in intimacy, surrounded by close, but their nature of their love is such that they tend to hide that and to express that indirectly even. But their hearts became so much overcome with desires for Krishna, love for Krishna, that sometimes the gopis tried to hide something. The very word gopi comes from the verbal root gup, which has to do with gupta, and gupta means to hide. So the gopis are those who try to hide what they feel for Krishna, because again, it's parakya. It's not something for public consumption. So their nature is trying to hide, but sometimes the very nature of that love also makes it to overflow, and it becomes impossible to hide because of its own volition. It becomes exposed. So again, in the beginning, they will say they are starting to say something out of love. They say something indirectly, and now we'll see out of love they cannot say anything else, and eventually out of love they will start singing the Venu-gita. So these are the different ecstatic waves that in which they are swimming or drowning transcendentally. They're happy to hear Krishna's flute. They're suffering because they are not along with the person who is sending that message. So again, different ways of ecstasy, like when Mahaprabhu entering Jagannath Puri, as we spoke in Bulgaria recently. So Mahaprabhu was arriving to Puri, and he saw the, how do you say, well, the chakra, the tower and the chakra on top. He ecstatically started to run to embrace Jagannath in ecstasy. That was an ecstatic response, just crying and shouting and running like a madman. So that was a level of ecstasy that made him act in that way. But before he could reach Jagannath, embrace him, another way of ecstasy made him faint and fall to the ground. So one ecstasy making him run, another ecstasy making him fall to the ground. One ecstasy makes him sing, another ecstasy making his voice choke up. I cannot say anything. So that's how these great personalities are swimming, being carried by these different sattvic bhavs, or transitory waves, as they are described in the ocean of Bhakti Rasa. So again, the silence of the gopis here is due to ecstatic love. It's not the silence due to other reasons, basically. We find some other reasons sometimes why people stop speaking. For example, it says some people may, I don't know, someone is expected to speak about something, whatever may be the topic, and some people may, for example, not speak because of lack of information. If I tell you, okay, please give a dissertation on whatever, the Holocaust. So if you don't know that much, you may remain in silence because you don't know what to say, basically. Or another reason may be you don't speak too much because you have, like, how to say in English, pánico escénico, stage fear. Like, oh, I have to face a public, an audience, and say something, or I'm not so expert at speaking, and so on. Or some other people may not speak because of dislike. I don't like the topic. I don't have a taste for that, so I don't want to speak about that. So that's the third option. Or for option, maybe I don't want to speak, or I won't speak because it's not the proper place to speak. It's not the proper situation. But we see in this case, none of these things are applicable to the gopis, basically, no? Because the first one is which? Lack of information. I mean, now the gopis are the ones who love Krishna the most, and to love him, as Guru Maharaj says, to know him, to love him is to know him, right? So they have information, they have transformation, and information follows. They know everything about Krishna more than anyone else. So it's not because of lack of information they're not speaking. No, the second one is stage fear. They are not expert on stage. The gopis are so expert dancing and singing and offering everything to Krishna. So it's not because of that also. Dislike of the topic? I don't think so. No, as we know, the gopis cannot but speak about Krishna. And we saw that in the Venu-gita, even when Sri Radha is speaking in Deviant Mad, like a crazy lady to the bumblebee, and she's criticizing Krishna so much, ecstatically. And at one point, the bumblebee, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, said, but if you criticize him so much, why at the same time you continue speaking about him? I mean, if he's so worthy of condemnation, why just you change the topic, basically? So she said, famous like, Dustyajas tat katarta, because it's very difficult to stop speaking about him. He's the object of all the speech in Braj. All of Braj's speech converging him. So whether we are praising him or criticizing him, we cannot but continue speaking about him. Our Harikatha is about him, our Gramya Katha is about him, our gossip is about him, everything revolves around him. So again, it's not that the gopis have dislike for Krishna Katha, on the contrary. And the last one is, someone may not speak because it's not the proper moment, but we see here is the perfect moment. Radha is with her group, in intimacy, speaking in a proper, but still there is silence. So again, why the silence is there? So the last almost part of the first part of the second verse is Mara Begina Bikshipa Manasam. Their minds are agitated by the waves of cupidity, by the rise of a particular flavor of love. They cannot speak anymore. They experience this joy of hearing Krishna, remembering him, but mixed with the turmoil of not being with him. Now try to imagine how those waves may clash in one's heart. So much joy, and the highest joy by hearing about Krishna, by hearing Krishna calling them, speaking to them, calling their names in the flute sound. So much joy, being in love with Krishna, the perfect love, but at the same time, the most devastating form of suffering, because we are not with him. And we cannot just run and meet him like the Gopas do. They just run after him, embrace him in front of all Vrindavan. They take selfies together, no problem. But the Gopis cannot do that. So it is said sometimes that in the Gopis come this desire, oh, well, let's pray so in our next life we can be born as Gopas. So we can join Krishna all day long. Not because they want to change their Sai Baba or something, but because of the facility that allows Sakya in the way of uninterrupted public. It's not that the Gopis are willing to sacrifice their Parakya Bhava in one sense, but it's a way of expressing, we would like to be with him at every single moment. So sometimes it's to say that that prayer is granted, and in Gaur Lila, all those Gopis appear in male forms, and they're able to join Krishna's Mahaprabhu all night long, all day long, close proximity, and nobody's telling anything. All in male bodies. They want to be male, okay, in Gaur Lila, you have all the manjaris being their male and joining Krishna being close by. So not only, just to finish, not only, let's go to the last word of the second verse, because in the last word of the second verse is Nripa, which means, O king. So you may wonder why Sukadev Goswami is narrating all this and suddenly saying to Parikshit, O king. No. What's the meaning behind that, O king? He's so absorbed into something, and what takes his attention from such an absorption to say, O king? So something interesting must be happening for him to conclude saying Nripa. Nripa means O king. So the point is that not only the gopis, Sri Radha and her group, became ecstatically silent and with their voices choked up and were not able to continue speaking due to the waves of cupidity, But as you may imagine, Sukadeva Goswami, also the main narrator here, became totally engrossed in what he was describing. So he himself, by empathy, started to experience all the similar symptoms that the gopis were going through. So Sukadeva Goswami's throat started to choke up also. So it is said that it's in that moment Sukadeva Goswami cannot almost say anything else, and he grabs the hand of Parikshit Maharaj, trying to say to him, "O king, try to imagine the suffering that Sri Radha is going now in separation at this precise moment of Gopi Gita. Now try to imagine your Gurudev is sharing Harikatha, and he grabs your hand, and through that grabbing of the hand is taking you into the Leela. Come with me, enter here, try to to empathize what's going on here, trying to convey. Again, what's going on in the Leela is vibrating in the heart of the pure devotee, and we as audience are trying to be drawn into that portal. That's the whole exercise of hearing Harikatha from the lips of realized Vaishnavas. They are speaking about something that is ongoing, that is happening at this precise moment, and they are connecting with that reality, ongoing reality. They're having a vision of that, they're having an experience of that, and they're extending that window of opportunity for those who want to do ashrutya, not to hear completely. So nripa can mean that. Sukadeva Goswami's throat is over, and he's grabbing the hands of Parikshit and all of us and saying, "O king, all of you, come with me." Or another meaning that sometimes is given, which of course is equally acceptable and complementary, is that Parikshit Maharaj himself is crying and horripilating, you say? His hairs are standing on end and so on, by being empathic with what's going on in the gopis' experience. So appreciating how his disciple, his student, is going through those transformations, Sukadeva Goswami says, like, "Oh king," basically. Like saying, if you feel like this, can you imagine how Radha is feeling at this precise moment? Like congratulating his student. You are doing fine. This is the result of hearing Bhagavatam properly. You are vicarious on some level experience of what's going on. So again, we are to get similarly on one level or another at some point. We are to get a particular feeling for the Bhagavatam. We are to identify with the emotions of the Brajavasis. That's Raga Marga. That's Raganuga Bhakti. To follow in the footsteps of the mood of the Brajavasis means how that will happen. You have to hear about them from someone who is living somehow with them, closer to them, and that experience is being extended to us through mainly this Shravan experience. So that's how we eventually will develop spiritual identity, by way of identifying with the necessities present in the Leela and develop a new sense of being according to those necessities, and replacing our false sense of necessities and our false sense of identity, basically. So in the Bhagavatam, we found the perfect examples of how to do that, the ideal roles to identify with. So basically, that's what is described in these two verses. Sukadeva Goswami is describing what sometimes is called the bhava avesh, or the ecstatic absorption, bhava avesh, of the gopis in the village while hearing Krishna's flute song from the forest. So at this point, before going to the next verse that of course we will see next class, it is said that in between the verses, our acharyas sometimes present questions that do not appear in the book in itself, but in between, reading between the lines. So Sukadeva Goswami has described to Parikshit Maharaj the extreme, extraordinary reaction to the sound of the flute. And again, as we mentioned, the gopis started to describe the sound of the flute, and it says Krishna Chestitam. They start to remember Krishna in a particular way, and they could not speak anymore. So at this point, Parikshit Maharaj will ask, and which specific form of Krishna did the gopis remember to end in such a way? In which form they were actually meditating? Because there are many Krishnas, as we know, many forms, many moods, and the reply to that question, which specific form of Krishna created this reaction in them, that will take us to verse number 5 that we will see next class. And this verse number 5 is probably the most well-known verse of the whole Venu-gita, and one of the most well-known important verses of the whole Srimad Bhagavatam. So be prepared for that shloka, a very important one. So when Parikshit Maharaj say that, no, so which form of Krishna give rise to that meditation? What did Sukadev Goswami say? Well, come to Madhavan on Monday, 6:30, and then you will know. So see you there. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Shri Dauji Gopal ki jai, Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Venu-gita ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Pramanand Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Hari Bol.